And we are live. Hello, everyone. This is My Two Cents, and welcome back to Today with 2 Cents, wrapping up your weekly news. Got a bit of a larger group here tonight, but as always, we'll be discussing either, I don't know if they're the biggest news. There's actually quite a lot that happened this week. I really had trouble deciding what we're going to talk about, but I tried to stick to both very highly publicized narratives, but also the ones that are the most important as well. So we're going to jump right into it because undoubtedly this first one is going to draw some strong opinions for no matter who you are. Well, I'm sure everybody knows the Mueller report was released this week, but that is not actually something we're going to talk about because, let's face it, everybody's already talked about. I even incorporated it into my video that I had planned this week. On Monday, President Donald Trump broke with historical precedent and has formally recognized that the Golan Heights are a sovereign territory of the nation of Israel, tweeting out on Monday. After 52 years, it is time for the United States to fully recognize Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, which is of critical strategic and security importance to the state of Israel and regional stability. For those of you who may not be familiar, back in 1967, there was an event that's come to be known as the 6-Day War. The pro-Israel narrative is that it was a defensive war against all the Arab states around it who were planning to attack, but Israel, in a clever move, launched a preemptive strike, saved itself, and in the process captured the Sinai Peninsula, West Bank, Gaza Strip, and the Golan Heights. Sinai Peninsula was eventually returned to Egypt in exchange for formal recognition, but the rest of the territories remain occupied by Israel to this day. The other narrative is that it was an unprovoked war of aggression because Israel simply wanted to control all these other territories, and they've been slowly encroaching upon and pushing the indigenous peoples out of those territories while forming settlements of their own all this while. Now, obviously, President Netanyahu was very pleased with this because regardless of what, rightly or wrongly, I don't think there's little denying that President Trump has been the most pro-Israel president we've had in quite some time, from the moving of the embassy in Tel Aviv to Jerusalem to now this and his.
Well, on that statement, how pro-Israel was Bush?
I mean, I'd say Bush was pro-Israel but more so in rhetoric than in action. Trump has been very pro-Israel in action in that I know Obama, Bush, Clinton, at least back to Clinton, each one of those presidents said they were going to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, but they never actually did. Trump is the first one to actually do it. And then also recognize the Golan Heights. He's certainly the first to do that. Now, the UN has condemned him, Canada, Turkey, obviously most Arab nations. I'm not aware of any Arab nations that are for that. But there's no doubt people on both sides of that issue feel very strongly. And I'll say, I've said this before, my biggest frustration discussing Israel or the Israel-Palestinian conflict is that regardless of what side you fall on, most people are absolutely convinced that everyone on the other side is just a victim of propaganda. If you support Israel, you've just fallen victim to the evil Zionist propaganda. They control the media. They control everything. You can't believe anything that's even remotely pro-Israel. It's just Zionist propaganda. And on the other side, says it's wrong. It's the Zionists who control the media. It's the Zionists who control everything. Israel is a evil state that just wants to control the world and kill all the Arabs that live in Israel and control the world. Otherwise, you can't believe anything that's even remotely pro-Israel because it's all Zionist propaganda or anti-Semitic propaganda as far as the people who are pro-Israel are concerned. But very little productive discussion is ever done because people on both sides of the issue are firmly convinced that anything that's even sounds like it's remotely in favor of the other is just propaganda. So if anyone has any thing to say about that, go ahead, and then I'll obviously weigh in, but this is sure to be a heated discussion.
I just want to annotate that that my support for Israel is more verbal than anything. I mean, I don't really support the idea or notion of giving them what's the word that I'm looking for? You know, just essentially giving money to them or anything like that.
Giving American tax dollars to Israel.
Foreign aid. That's what I meant. Yeah, essentially that. I don't really support that notion. As far as the Golan Heights go, I do not see. As far as what I'm hearing from the surface, I don't see anything that much wrong with it.
All right.
The only thing I'll say on this subject is something I've been saying for quite a while. Stop funding both sides. Israel is supposedly a developed country. Why are they getting millions of dollars in foreign aid money every year?
Yeah, that's my logic.
Palestine has repeatedly used the aid money it gets for military purposes against Israel. Stop funding both sides.
Well, yeah, I think we can agree on that. Anyways, in preparation for this, I did my reading. I tried to read up as much on the history of the Six-Day War as I possibly could. I drew from sources such as Myths and Facts About Israel from the Jewish Virtual Library, also What Really Happened in the Six-Day War from the Foreign Policy Institute, the former being a more pro-Israel publication, the latter being a more pro-Palestinian publication. And just try to sift through it all and see what are the raw facts concerning what happened. And like I said, believe me, that's difficult because you're going to be hard-pressed to find anyone who's not writing from a really pro-Israel or a really anti-Israel stance. But from what I gather, here's the historical reality of the situation. Leading up to 1967, there was a lot of rhetoric coming from the nations around Israel, Syria, Egypt, Jordan, that the Arab states wanted to destroy Israel. Now, whether or not that rhetoric actually came from the leaders in control of those governments or whether or not they intended to actually act on that is another question, but there's no denying there was such rhetoric. There were terrorist attacks taking place against Israel from the Golan Heights, one position which, regardless of what anyone feels about who has the right to control the Golan Heights, from a strictly military standpoint, there's no denying that whoever controls the Golan Heights has a huge military advantage for warfare taking place in that region. It's the higher ground. It's ideally, if somebody wanted to attack Israel, the Golan Heights are a strategic staging ground. And indeed, there were Israeli civilians that were getting sniped at from the Golan Heights on a regular basis. Now, whether or not that was officially sanctioned by the Syrian government, again, another question, but that is what was going on. Egyptian President Nasser at the time closed Israel, the Straits of Tiran, off to Israeli shipping, an action that was deemed illegal by the UN under international law. I actually don't remember off the top of my head whether the UN condemned it, but President Johnson at the time condemned it. And after, at least if those remained closed to Israel for a long amount of time, Israel's oil supplies would have run out. He also withdrew a UN peacekeeping force that was stationed between Israel and Egypt in the Sinai Peninsula and mobilized troops into the Sinai Peninsula. And finally, Israel ended up striking first. Now, historically speaking, there's no question the Six-Day War was, in fact, a war of aggression on the part of Israel. Now, obviously, Israel says if we hadn't done it, they eventually would have attacked us. It seems to me Israel was kind of in a lose-lose situation because if they didn't attack, because the Israeli military couldn't stay on alert forever, and there were troops at their border, if they didn't attack and the Straits of Tiran remained closed, they would have run out of oil, which would have severely impacted their capability to defend themselves if the Arabs had attacked first. At the same time, if they attacked first, they would know that for the rest of history, the Arabs would claim they were the aggressors, and indeed, that's exactly what's happened. So all that to say, does Israel have a just claim to control the Golan Heights? Can't say so, given that they seized it in a military action. At the same time, I don't think it really matters either way because from a strictly military strategic standpoint, it's clear that they understood that they needed to control that if they wanted to defend themselves from an attack that would occur. So that's a lot to say. Nobody's really innocent in this conflict.
I have a question. Like, I know that I'm the only non-ANCAP, and the rest of the people in this panel right here are all ANCAPs and ultimately believe in that there should not be any existence of any state or anything like that. But just from a quote-unquote status point of view, is there anyone here that thinks that Israel should not exist at all and that Palestine has complete legitimacy on this area?
The only problem with that stance is that Israel. Okay, so Israel was given that land of the Palestinians by the British government back in the 1940s. The Palestinians completely agreed to that agreement, and the only stance is that they agreed to it, so they need to coexist with Israel on that front. But other than that, no. At least personally, as an anarcho-capitalist myself, I don't believe there should be an Israeli government. I don't believe there should be a Palestinian government. I don't believe there should be any governments at all. However, if we're talking about that on if there should be a government, Israel and Palestine really need to work together because Palestine agreed to allow the Israelis to live there, and they need to own up to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, to answer your question, Darkon, obviously, yeah, as ANCAPs, we oppose the existence of any state, but tabling that question for the moment now, okay, I'm going to accept for the fact moment states do exist and the state of Israel is one such state. Do I believe Israel never had a right to exist in the first place? No, I don't. I don't think that's, I don't agree with that. And also, I think, again, with respect to, I know there are others, even in the libertarian community, who take a much stronger stance against Israel than I do. But it has been my experience that people who are against Israel, or for the most part, say, Israel is the real criminal in all this. Most of the time, when you push them on particular historical facts, what it comes down to ends up being, I hate to say it, but those filthy Jews. I don't want to say everyone who's against Israel is an anti-Semite, but it's been my experience that people who say I'm not anti-Jew, I'm just anti-Israel, when you start discussing the facts with them, breaking down specific points that happen in history, what it keeps coming back to is, oh yeah, but those Jews. So, I mean, I think the Jews have, as far as Jewish people wanting to live in peace and voluntarily interact with one another in the land of Israel, which is the religious capital of Judaism, so long as they're not forcefully stealing land from anyone else who had a right to be there first, I don't see a problem with that. Now, again, that raises the question of whether do the Jews or the Palestinians own the land, but I don't believe in land that's owned by ethnicities or by collective groups of people. I believe that in land that's owned by individuals. So
this might get into a little bit of a side. Well, I don't mean to lead us into a side tangent, but what annoys me the most is when that somebody would be all like, he's a Jew, or be pointing out as to how a good portion of rich people are Jews, so therefore we are under Jewish control or anything or something like that, acting like it is automatically a bad thing or something like that. I mean, if you can point out to, and then just thinking to myself, okay, I don't care about their Jewish heritage. I mean, if you can point out to me an individual Jew that is bad, I'll accept that they're bad, but you have to point them out as individuals, not as just, oh, he's Jewish, or this organization is under Jewish control, so therefore it's bad or something like that. Like, my question is, who's the Jew that's controlling it?
Exactly. And I would say historically, okay, I will say this, central bankers are evil. And it also happens to be the case that there are historic examples of central bankers who happen to be Jewish. The most famous example being the Rothschild family. But I think, their actions should be attributed to the actions of central bankers, not first and foremost as the actions of ethnic Jews, because the whole point of the common anti-Semitic trope is that anyone who is ethnically Jewish, whether they practice Judaism or not, is by blood part of this worldwide, undercover conspiracy to oppress other peoples and control the world. That's the Nazi alt-right, what have you narrative.
Yeah, I mean, you look at central bankers, I think we can all agree that they are practically useless and maybe even outright evil and don't really produce any product or anything like that. But then you'll look at an example of a Jew like Steven Spielberg, who actually does produce a product, that being movies that we all know and love,
Mm-hmm. And he does that as an individual, not first and foremost as a member of the Jewish race.
Exactly.
Another point to be made about the whole thing is, and I think this is another point that's lost, historically speaking, there was never an independent nation called Palestine. The modern day Palestinians are descended from Syrians, Jordanians, or Egyptians. And at least for literally hundreds of years, the entire region was controlled by the Turks during the Ottoman Empire. Look through the history books. I've yet to find one example of an outcry for an independent Palestinian state during those periods. In fact, it's the term Palestinian didn't, if I'm not mistaken, the term Palestinian didn't even become mainstream until the 1970s. So as far as the claim that the land rightly belongs to these to the Palestinian people, I think the historic claim for that is a lot weaker than for any independent nation called Palestine living there, as opposed to groups of Jewish people living there. But then final point, there's little debate to be when groups like Hamas and Hezbollah have stated explicitly that they are not interested in a two-state solution. They are interested only in the total annihilation of Israel and the execution of all Jews worldwide. It's difficult for me to see how there could ever feasibly be any kind of two-state solution when you're dealing with people who have made clear that that is their stance.
Exactly.
I may make a point. The only reasonable argument I've ever heard for Israel is not a legitimate state comes from the argument that it was basically created by the British and the rest of the Western powers after World War II. But if that argument flows, then so are the rest of the states around that region. Egypt, Syria, Iran, Iraq, all of those countries were essentially drawn with lines on a map after World War I when the Western powers carved up the Ottoman Empire. So if Israel is an illegitimate state, so is every other one of them.
That's true.
Definitely. And so a final point before we take this too far. The whole thing about why did Trump recognize the Golan Heights? Now, I don't propose to understand specifically what his motives are or who all is behind that motivation. But again, when discussing foreign policy issues, as I've said before, the question to ask is not what are the specific politicians saying about why they're doing what they're doing. The question to ask is who stands to benefit the most. Now, I think there's no question that as far as why has the U.S. supported Israel, reason being a nuclear-armed power like that in the region is a strategic advantage to the U.S. in that it's a country like Iran, ever since the Iranian Revolution, the U.S. no longer has influence over the Iranian government like it used to, and therefore doesn't have influence over the Iranian oil fields or over whether or not Iran continues to utilize the petrodollar. However, if the U.S. is aligned with the most powerful military force in the region, Israel, that at least gives the U.S. a strategic advantage to ensure that the Iranians keep using the petrodollar, or any other Arab nation in the region continues using the petrodollar. Like I said, I doubt it's that simple, and I don't claim to have all the answers. But the U.S. simply put, or any other country, does not support particular governments or regimes because they're freedom-loving democracies or whatever. They support them because they have something to gain. And at least for the time being, their interests are aligned. So whatever the case may be. It's
because we got to have money.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Anyways.
All about the money.
Hey, Mag.
Hello, Mag.
Sorry, I'm late.
Ironically, much like Ilhan Omar said, it's all about the Benjamins, except not quite in the fashion that she was speaking of.
So
all right. Moving on. This story, this next one I'm excited to talk about, not because I think it's a big deal, actually quite the opposite, but the fact that this made national news, I don't know whether to laugh or cry. Chase High School in Maryland made national news this week after the Washington Post published an article about what was going on. Great crime indeed at Chase High School. We all know that high schools are just, brewing places of iniquity and mass crime. What happened in Chase High School? Well, it seems that a group of boys at this high school secretly amongst themselves created a list of the hottest girls in high school. 17 specifically were listed 1 through 17 as to who was the most physically attractive. Through one boy squealing, I guess, to a friend of his who was a girl, they found out that this list existed, and one way or another, they got a copy. They went to the high school, explained how wrong they think this is. It's, degrading to women, and in the age of Me Too and sexual assault, absolutely not something to joke about. The school responded by investigating, and it seemed after their investigation was done, a single boy was given detention after school, and that was to be the end of it. However, these girls, they were not satisfied with that. With a recruiting 70 more students. Hang on, just let me finish and then we'll talk. Recruiting 70 more students, they marched on the school administration and said, it is time to speak up. It is time to end all this toxic masculinity and sexual violence. These boys need to get called out, and things need to change. And apparently some girls have shared their experiences with toxic masculinity and sexual violence.
Oh my God.
Whoa. Okay. Violence. You know that one picture of Jackie Chan where he looks all flabbergasted? That is what I am like right now. How can you call that violence? What the fuck?
It's not. Just for the record, all boys in every single high school do this. I did that back in high school with several other guys. I'm not even kidding. And
girls won't say this, but they do the exact same thing.
They
do the exact same thing.
Night Shift, you are a misogynistic and violent piece of shit now.
I know. I get it. Oh, God.
You're an old timey that must suffer.
I know, right? But it's the way it is in all high schools. God.
Okay.
Teenagers.
Yes. I'm going to say, for the record, I know for a fact the girls in my high school had such a list ranking the boys.
Yep.
And I recall when me and one of my friends discovered where we were on it, we high-fived each other.
Nice.
So I think the difference here is men tend to like knowing that the women are checking them out. Doesn't always work out the same the other way, but both men and women are absolutely doing this. Yes, I can't say I ever formally made a list or that me and my friends in high school actually wrote anything down, but we absolutely had these kinds of discussions.
Yes.
Why? Because let's face it, there are teenagers are horny and they're thinking about attractive members of the opposite sex. Now, do I think it was particularly smart of these boys to actually write it down? I mean, probably not. I think if they ought to have known, if word got out, there probably were going to be some hurt feelings, and with hurt feelings comes drama. But for goodness sakes, this has made national news. Something that everyone in high school has absolutely done, is absolutely normal for high school kids to do. And this has made national news to talk about sexual violence and toxic masculinity.
You're really wasting precious airtime for this? Come on.
Or they just have nothing to air. And the second thing I want to state is that, kind of like when you were talking about earlier, how you were wondering where you were on that list when the girls were doing that. Here's the thing. A, learn to take a compliment, and B, I know, like, okay, here's the thing from what I have learned personally. A, it's about the intention and the tone of which they do it. If they do it in a really, how do I put it?
Okay, Mag, I'll give you an alternative scenario. I think this potentially could have, let's suppose for a second the boys had written this list out, posted it on the wall everywhere at school, and specifically highlighted who the ugliest girl was, and then proceeded to, throw hot dogs at her or something.
Oh my God.
Okay,
that's from Family Guy.
Yes.
And I've had that before, and it's not fun.
Now, I think that might have been a little bit more newsworthy, regardless of what. I mean, I'm just gonna say that's mean. Is it necessarily? Is that even necessarily national news? No, but I think that's just downright not a very nice thing to do.
I just want to.
Had that before. Yeah, that's not fun. And basically, for what I was kind of saying before, if you're doing it in a really derogatory term, or like you're doing it in a very creepy way, yes, you have every right to be upset about that. But they're doing it in just the terms of like who's like hotter or whatnot. You should just take a compliment. Besides, those girls will probably get all those kinds of compliments anyway in their day-to-day, well, not day-to-day, but like they probably get those compliments common anyway, so it really shouldn't be that surprising. Even the most shy girls may at least get something.
Mag, how dare you be such an internalized misogynist?
I'm a girl. I'm allowed to do this. As one of the people that would get that.
No, you have internalized misogyny. You are You are inadvertently adherent to the patriarchy. Whee! Anyway,
Oh my
I just
God.
want to.
I've had it so much worse. Those girls that are just complaining about boys, like, oh, making that list or whatever. You don't know what attacking is. Stop it. Get some
Honestly,
help.
I can guarantee you something. I can guarantee you all something. The only girls that complained about this and made it a big deal were the ones that were close to the bottom. Like the number 1, number 2 spot girls, the pretty girls, the ones that they voted number 1 and number 2. They didn't have a thing to say about it. They were flattered. It was the girls that were like 50, girls that were like 55 on the list that really that made this into something. I can guarantee that.
Or potentially the ones that
And
didn't even
here's the
make the
thing,
list,
those
because
who-
from what I'm
Exactly, yes.
the CBS
And-
article I'm looking at said there were 17 girls in particular that were ranked. I don't know if the list had more, but there were these 17 in particular that are identified as having been on the list.
I wouldn't be surprised when there was more. And here's also the thing to understand is whether girls verbally say it or not, we do it to each other. We vote on who's prettier, who's hotter, which one has like the most boyfriends or whatever hell. Girls do the exact same thing. And if anything, they're more petty about it. So they have nothing to complain about. At least guys are trying to give a freaking compliment. Just
patriarchy.
give a compliment for the love of God.
I just want to quickly showcase that this is the Jackie Chan flabbergasted face has pretty much become a meme. This is my reaction right now, and I'm pretty sure it's the reaction of all of us to this stupidity right here.
Right.
All right.
No, mine is just the face palming face.
The
All right.
Card face palm.
Face palm that distracts the hand.
There's a particular lesson I feel like every child's parents need to sit them down around the time they're 12, 13 years old, or perhaps they're more mature enough to hear it when they're younger. But basically, it's this. No matter who you are, there is always going to be somebody more attractive, more successful, more whatever metric we're talking about. There's always somebody who's better than you. You can either sit around crying about it, or you can make something of yourself.
Do the squats to get that better looking ass, for example.
Exactly.
And also with that kind of statement, there's also the reverse. There's always someone who's going to be worse than you, but sometimes people can take that too negatively.
So I'm sorry, but for the girls that are saying my feelings were so hurt that I was low on this list, I'm sorry. Reality doesn't care about your feelings. If the guys think other girls are more attractive, you can either do something about it, or you can ignore it. But sitting around crying and making a big deal out of this isn't going to make the boys find you more attractive. You can't, by the force of government. As much as people would like it to be true, the government can point guns at people's heads all they want. It's not going to actually change who they are and are not attracted to.
I force you to be attracted to this transgender man.
Yeah, and I find it's very telling when you look at the fact that most SJWs are unattractive females.
Lord, with the notion that Mag just pointed out there, Lord help us if Riley Dennis was in that position.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
No.
I mean, if I remember correctly, she was very unpopular in high school and got bullied, so...
Fuck that shit. Don't care.
Right.
Yeah.
Not helping anybody by taking your misery out on anyone else. On everyone else.
Yeah, I've learned that the hard way, because when I was in high school, I hated my curves so much. Like, I wasn't fat or anything, but I was not used to my body being like curvy and whatnot. So I always wore like this big jacket. But because of that, it made me look a lot bigger than what I was. So I used to get bullied a lot for that. But then as I started getting more comfortable with myself and I started wearing more flattering clothes, boys actually started to notice me. So if you just pick yourself up, dress a little bit nicely, maybe lose a couple pounds and whatnot, you will get boys to get some attention, or at least not get bullied for it. And also, I was being more bullied for the fact that I looked pretty, or people thought I was pretty, than actually the fact I was ugly. Which is, I find that weird, but okay.
Yeah, on a quick, it seems to me, the most attractive people don't like to share the attention, so they'll find the next most attractive people and try to cut them down however they can. But
yeah.
On that note, more ridiculousness from the hashtag #MeToo. I'm debating whether or not I actually want to make a video about that, but I couldn't resist covering it on this stream. Anyways, we're already half an hour in, so
let it die.
Last thing to cover quick. Like I said, I struggled to decide what we are going to talk about. There was always the Jussie Smollett having his charges dropped against him, more than likely because he's friends with the Obamas. But final thing to talk about, Article 13 has finally passed in Europe. So for those of you who may not be familiar, it is the European Parliament passed this sweeping change, which the current copyright law is something like 2 decades old ever since this change. And now the directive, which is called the Copyright and Digital Single Market, essentially, I hope I'm summarizing this right, but effectively it takes away all forms of fair use and pretty much heavily favors quote unquote real news organizations and steps on independent content creators.
I think there's a video by the Burger Craig, if any of you guys ever heard of him. He has a video talking about Article 13, and I would have to actually watch it, but just by going off of the title and the thumbnail, I think he said that that there's a possibility that Theresa May could overturn it, but that's likely not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
From what I understand,
that she could essentially veto it.
But from what I understand with that kind of thing, unless you made everything in it, and because of like, say for example with YouTube, they will be so scared with copyright clause and whatnot because they're going to go down to the most strictest one on possible, so they're going to follow this. So if you want to be a content creator, unless you made everything yourself, you're probably going to get a copyright strike. So YouTube's probably going to only monetize people who are like corporations, music studios, things like that. So things like memes are going to die, and I'm going to be very sad.
Yeah.
Okay. So I found the video. One second, right here. Yeah, how Angela Merkel can still stop Article 13. Yeah, this is just an ad right here, but that's what.
Want to?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me.
Politician want to?
There might be a
wishful thinking.
I mean, in reality, she might be able to stop it, but just by going off the title, it still does not relieve the doubt that she would actually stop it. That the doubt that I have of her actually stopping it.
What's so sad is things like, say for example, copyright. Like, let's say for example, music videos on YouTube. So many of the songs that I've like so many bands and songs that I've learned to really, really enjoy has been started from music videos. But with this new thing, those things are going to be completely gone. And so that's going to mean, like, if you want to, it's really hard to promote yourself when people aren't, like, sharing around your music and whatnot. And this is going to stop people basically giving you free advertisement.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing, I mean, the point I'd like to make, we all know that as far as states maintaining their power, independent content creators are the biggest threat to people not accepting the mainstream narratives that are put out by the CNNs, the BBCs, the Fox Newses of the world. And they're right now, the states around the world are doing everything they can to silence independent content creators, be it hate speech laws, be it now copyright being the engine by which they're going to try to shut down independent content creators. But I mean, whatever they say about protecting, we got to protect this person, we got to protect that person. At the end of the day, what you see is it benefits mainstream media news networks, giant tech cronies, and it essentially shuts down independent content creators. And that's the latest attempt in the European Union.
I just thought of
here, and you know it.
I just thought of something right now. Since I'm on a panel full of ANCAPs, what is the ANCAP position on copyright?
Whatever the fuck you want.
Yeah, intellectual property is not a thing.
Yeah.
So abolish all copyright laws. If, like, for example, Bering just wanted to, like, take the Total Drama Island bear and use it, then he can damn well use it.
One thing I could see is like
I mean, it's a legitimate question. Sorry, I don't mean to like come off as aggressive being the only non-ANCAP here, but
no,
still.
it makes sense. And the most I could say, like, say for example, like most people, why they like like copyright stuff is because, oh, people are stealing artists' songs and whatnot. But the thing is, that artist can sue that person if they're completely copying what they're doing. And so stuff like that is not going to happen as often as you think it does. And I mean, like, literally copying and pasting it.
Yeah, like cases like that, I think actually fall under fraud, because if you copy it, like, say if you copy a novel word for word and then put your name on it, you're essentially defrauding both the author and the customer, because the customer now thinks that you've done that. You're basically selling things via deception. And the same thing with, say if you take if you take somebody else's thing that they've made, reverse engineer it and create your own version, and then try and claim that's the original, that's again selling things via deception, which would be fraud, because
which you can also go to court for, but that's different than copyright.
And you may sway some people to buy your thing instead of the actual original. It's basically gained via deception. Fraud. So I think most of the cases where you could make an argument for intellectual property, you can make a stronger one that the act was actually fraud.
Would you guys say that copyright laws is a good way for corporations to legally hold their monopolies? It's the way that they do it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
More or less, yeah.
Was the original intention of the first copyright laws was to essentially shut down authors that the British Crown didn't like.
I know there's a particular case a lot of people like to bring up. It's for, I forget exactly what the medication was, but there was a pill that could be manufactured for about $5 a pill. Yeah. And because of the actual copyright, the inventor of this pill was selling it for like $700 a pill.
Yep.
Which is bullshit.
And the point being, he created a medication that can improve people's lives. It costs $5 to create the pill, but because it was his quote intellectual property, he can force people to spend way more than it costs to produce it, even though competitors could easily produce the same pill. Suppose someone else had come up with the same thing without his input. Well, he just happened to be the first one who puts in the copyright, so now it belongs to him.
Wasn't this the one where a bunch of college students reverse engineered it and basically could produce it in a garage and sell it for $3?
Exactly. You could produce it with in a high school chemistry lab. It was that simple.
One thing I've also noticed is that, and again, this is kind of going more towards YouTube just because that's us and whatnot. We can't anymore we can't take influences anymore, and we can't just, because here's the thing with influences, you're taking the original, changing it to yours, you're just giving them credit for the original. But unfortunately, because of the way laws are, or how much they're trying to crack down, you can't do that much anymore without getting the copyright strike, and that's going to be so much more stricter now. Oh, and that's the biggest problem, because, say, for example, with music, all music artists take influence from something else, or they get their inspiration from some other song, literature, something. They get inspiration from something, but they take that inspiration and change it into their own style or to whatever thing they're trying to make. But if they change it up to make it towards their style, it's not the original. It's inspired, but unfortunately, even now, you can't do that much anymore. And especially once this really starts cracking down, YouTube is, you're going to see a lot less content that's going to be made, which is really sad. Sorry to go on a tangent there.
No, but I'd say when it comes to the intellectual property law, pretty much if you're going to make the case that someone else has stolen something from you, you have to be able to clearly define what it was, why it rightly belongs to you, and how they stole it from you. I mean, in cases like the pill,
you date all your documents.
if someone through voluntary transaction, acquired the resources they needed to create something, and you claim because you built it first, them copying you and building it is somehow against the law. That's ridiculous. If they acquired all the resources, they happen to build the same thing, how is that depriving you of your ability to use and enjoy your own property? If it comes to
having it at a lower price.
If it comes to, again, like a book, somebody copy and paste all the text of your book and then puts their name on it, claiming they're the author, I would have to agree with Pipsqueak. That's not a case of intellectual property. That's a case of fraud.
And in case of like other stuff as well, let's say, for example, like you were talking about the pill thing. One person has it at a really high price, but you can take that same pill and just put it at a cheaper price, which will make it so there will be less of a monopoly. But unfortunately, because of copyright law, things can't be fluctuated through with the free market and whatnot. So things are going to be really high priced. Things are going to have a really big monopoly because the free market isn't allowed to invest in things that they really would want to do. As for example, someone takes something, improves it, and makes it better, or someone takes that same product, finds a way to make it cheaper, and sells it cheaper. You can't do that under that kind of stuff.
All right, and that is that's definitely a topic to have another live stream on all its own. We have been going for 40 minutes though, so if anybody has any closing thoughts on that point, go ahead, and then we'll move on to the weekly hottie.
F the state.
Amen to that.
All right, amen to that. All right, with that, moving on to everyone's favorite part of the show, the weekly hottie. Drumroll, please.
Yes.
All right, this week's. I got to make sure the share button's working again before I try to.
It's not me this time.
Yeah, it's not you this time. All right, this week's weekly hottie is another return. She has not been the weekly hottie for a while, but this week's weekly hottie is Lauren Alexis. She is a British YouTuber / Instagram model. Accent is pretty sexy, but she makes all kinds of videos on all kinds of random stuff. Every now and then she does modeling, though. So without further ado, here is Lauren Alexis and her latest clothing haul. And my music is not working for some reason. Oh, come on. You're not going to play an ad right in the middle of this. Oh, and you're going to play 2 ads in the middle of this.
Wow, really?
You're giving them free ads.
Wow.
Dad ass though, am I right?
God.
Get out of the way, Ben.
Sorry, I can't seem to get rid of this ad for the Ben Shapiro Show.
The worst censor bar.
All right.
Ever.
Oh, really? That's exactly what I don't want to see when I'm seeing a hot girl with Ben Shapiro.
Yeah, Ben.
Oh, it's something I want to say just before we end it. If I don't know if this is exactly the same for the Patreon one, but I know for Subscribe Star, he's 14 away from being able to edit these live streams, like actually make a 2 day with 2 cents. He's $14 away. People, come on, it's $1.
I do have to give a pointer out. My 2 cents. You could just click on your own profile in this Hangout to make it so that you're the one who's presented, so that that the screen will not revert back to us. Just click when you're doing the weekly hottie and you want to make it so that you're the only one who's presented on screen and the screen doesn't revert to any of our icons or anything like that. Just click on your own profile.
Just like you did the Pipsqueak one time.
Oh, yeah. Learn something new every day.
I remember, apparently in one of the live streams, you had him be the star.
Yeah, I didn't even know I didn't even know I'd clicked on him. But, I
don't know. It was one of the bronies.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it seems like no matter what, the problem with doing the show live is no matter how hard I try, there's some kind of technical difficulty when I try to share the weekly hottie. In this case, I press play and then it shows 2 ads, and then I click off, and then suddenly Ben Shapiro's face shows up in the middle of they're saying, "Hey, watch the Ben Shapiro show." I click off, and then another one appears.
You can just hear Ben Shapiro during the whole thing. Hey, you shouldn't be watching this. You know, porn is bad for your health, or something like that. But by the way, just so everyone knows, I am a bit of a fan of Ben Shapiro. But come on, let's be real.
Actually, that reminds me of that thing of Goku in front of the hot girl that says, "Hey, this is Goku. Remember, all the times that you're masturbating, you could be training. Go train."
Oh, I am a bit sad when it comes to Goku because I like more Dragon Ball, not Z. And if you've seen some of the humor with him not understanding gender, it's just, oh my god.
Yeah,
Yeah, him with Bulma again.
No. And that's your nerdy time of the week.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is our 2 cents.
Yeah, and I will let Darkon have that line there. That is our 2 cents. So
No,
I'll take it for what it's worth.
Rock from Pokemon.